Act 3, Scene 1, and this is the turning point in the play. So we see Banquo, who is alone in the courtyard, voicing his suspicion that Macbeth has killed Duncan in order to fill the witch's prophecies. He muses that perhaps the witch's vision for his own future will also come true, but kind of forgets it in the moment. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth enter as king and queen along with the trumpets, and there's Lennox and Ross. Macbeth says he's going to hold a feast to celebrate the coronation, and Banquo will be honoured as chief guest. Banquo says that he's got to go out riding, but he'll definitely come back, and Macbeth tells him that Malcolm and Donalbain will not confess to killing their father, and they're in England telling strange stories about what's actually happened. After confirming that Fleance will accompany Banquo on his trip, Macbeth wishes Banquo a safe ride. And we get left with Macbeth on the stage alone again. And here he summons two murderers who he has hired. Now, these aren't, sort of assassins. They are poor people who need to earn money. He waits for them and sort of is musing aloud to himself about the witch's prophecy coming true for Banquo, making his children kings. And we know that he's fixated on this idea. He puts an end to his worry by actually hiring the men not only to kill Banquo, but to kill Fleance, Banquo's son, as well. Macbeth has already blamed their current state of poverty on Banquo. He tells them that while Banquo is his enemy as much as theirs, loyal friends of Banquo prevent him from killing Banquo himself. And then they discuss the particulars of the murder. They have to attack him as he returns from his ride at a certain distance from the palace, and they must kill Fleance at the same time. It's quite a long scene, this scene, and so we're going to take it stage by stage and just make sure that we absolutely have the understanding of what is happening, because it is a crucial scene in the play. So the scene opens with Banquo stood in the courtyard on his own, and he says, "Thou hast it now, King, Cawdor, Glamis, all, as the weird women promised." And we can see that clear reference to the supernatural there. But Banquo's ruminating on the idea that Macbeth seems to have everything. But crucially, he says, "I fear thou playedst most foully for it." That echo of the witch's language again there. So Banquo here is showing that he understands what Macbeth has done in order to achieve his goals. The deliberate use of the word foully here links to the witch's statement that foul is fair and fair is foul, that seemingly fair Macbeth is indeed foul at heart. He then goes on to consider that if he was going to be the root and father of many kings, and that choice of word root there is important, that natural imagery. And the contextual point to note is that James I is rumoured to be a descendant of Banquo, and so it helps to justify his claim for the throne here. And he goes on and he is questioning if it's come through for Macbeth, will there be some truth in his prophecies? Will his sons indeed become kings? The scene continues with Macbeth and Lady Macbeth arriving and seeing Banquo alone in the courtyard. They approach him and talk about what he's going to be doing in the afternoon, and Macbeth says that they're going to be holding the feast. Banquo says that of course he will go, that he remains loyal to Macbeth, which is ironic because we know that obviously from the previous part of the scene that he's beginning to become suspicious of what Macbeth has done to become the king. And there is a conversation where they ask about whether or not Banquo is going to be going out riding. And Macbeth tries to steer the conversation towards what is happening with Malcolm and Donalbain, who have gone off to England and Ireland. And he says that they're not confessing their cruel parricide, saying that they're refusing to say that they arranged the killing of their father. And instead, they're filling their hearers with strange invention. What this means is he's saying that they're telling stories about perhaps maybe even himself having been part of this crime. And it ends this part with Banquo going off to go riding with his son, and Macbeth wishing him well and saying, "We look forward to your return." The scene develops with Macbeth dismissing the thanes and the attendants in court, telling them that every man can be a master of his time. He says that they're going to stay apart until 7 o'clock tonight to make society the sweeter welcome. So he's saying to them, it will be much better to spend some time apart, and then when we're together, we'll appreciate it more. But actually, what it's indicating is that the Macbeths are beginning to isolate themselves from society. They want to keep themselves to themselves. We know that Macbeth is becoming fragmented. His sanity is beginning to break down. And as with Jekyll and Hyde, the idea of the newly appointed King and Queen of Scotland isolating themselves and keeping themselves away would be really worrying. We know that when Dr. Jekyll started to remove himself from society because of the burden of the secret that he was keeping, people like Utterson and Enfield started to comment on it because it was really unusual. And it's exactly the same here. He then goes on and says, God be with you, which is somewhat ironic because he's aware that his actions have gone against God. And we know that straight after the murder, he felt that amen was sticking in his throat. He couldn't say it. And this really emphasizes how lost he is now and how far he is going to fall. He then moves on, and perhaps one of my favourite lines from the play is, "To be thus is nothing but to be safely thus." He's contemplating his situation and he's thinking about his reign, his kingship. And he's basically trying to say that it's nothing, to be called king is nothing unless there's no threat to the throne. And Shakespeare's using this as a bit of a veiled warning to James I about the precarious nature of kingship. It's emphasising here that actually, you're not safe when you are the king. People are always plotting and scheming behind your back. And furthermore, it emphasises Macbeth's paranoia and his deteriorating mind. He sees everything as a threat. And perhaps even more so is Banquo. Banquo was the biggest threat at the moment to Macbeth. Banquo was there with him when the prophecies were made. He has that information. He knows that Macbeth was promised to be king. And we saw him, didn't we, just now, saying that he doubted Macbeth, that he is beginning to become suspicious of him. But Macbeth here is pointing out Banquo's qualities. He's saying that his dauntless temper of his mind, he hath a wisdom that doth guide his valour to act in safety. He knows that Banquo is a courageous, brave, very intelligent man. And that is going to be the undoing of Banquo because he is such a threat to Macbeth and his kingship. Macbeth continues in what we are now beginning to become very familiar with, this convoluted, extended soliloquies that we see from him where he contemplates his actions and the situation that he finds him in. He says here his genius is rebuked, as it is said Mark Antony's was by Caesar. This is a direct reference to another one of Shakespeare's plays, based on the historical love affair between Mark Antony, who was a Roman emperor, and Cleopatra. And Mark Antony threw his kingdom away for love, neglecting his political duties. He believed that he was treated harshly by Rome and ended up falling on his sword. He ended up committing suicide. And Macbeth here is contemplating his situation and for what reason he has done what he's done. And there is a little bit of a reflection on perhaps Lady Macbeth leading him into this here. And he goes on further now and he says, "Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown and put a barren sceptre in my gripe." So he's talking about the prophecy. He's talking about the fact that he has no children of his own. He has no son to inherit the crown from him. But I think it's a little bit more, again, against Lady Macbeth. Quite a harsh term used to describe a woman who is unable to bear children is to describe her as barren. And the word fruitless, again, that idea of something producing fruit, something coming to fruition. And he is perhaps obsessing about the prophecy where he will not have living heirs who will inherit the throne. So for him, this is a real kind of kick because it means that everything that he's done has been a little bit pointless. And he says that if it be so, and he's not going to have a surviving son who will inherit the throne, for Banquo's issue have I failed my mind, for them the gracious Duncan have I murdered. So he's talking about the fact that it's actually a little bit pointless. It's ironic that he's considered everything that he's done. He's damned his soul to hell in order for Banquo's sons to inherit the throne. And he's really bitter about this. In a way, we could argue that he's showing remorse for his actions Not necessarily because he regrets them and he regrets what he's done, but because he realizes that without heirs, it's all meaningless. There's a desperate aching for children underlying very much of this play. And it's become, as we saw quite early on, a fixation for Macbeth. You know, the first thing after hearing the prophecy, he turns to Banquo and says, "Your children will be kings." And there's an emptiness here for him and a pointlessness and a hopelessness to everything that he's done. So it's really important at this point to pause and think, do we have any sympathy for him? Or are we still feeling that kind of he's getting what he deserves here? So halfway through this scene, and we can see that Macbeth has fallen into a desperate place. He's considering the idea to be thus is nothing, but to be safely thus. This shows his paranoia. He's panicking that his deeds in the quest to become king is going to be discovered, and he knows that he has to take further action to secure his throne. He knows that Banquo was present when the prophecies were made. Banquo already suspects Macbeth had played most foully for it. So in the next section of this scene, we're going to see Macbeth trying to justify his reasons for having Banquo assassinated. He's going to start manipulating the truth with these poor people who live within the kingdom, blaming Banquo for everything that is wrong with their situation. So we're going to move fairly swiftly through this section of the play, just drawing out the important relevant points. So Macbeth is speaking with these gentlemen and he's talking to them about why they should agree to kill Banquo for him. And he blames Banquo for the poverty in the land and uses this to manipulate them into the killing. So he says, "It was he," referring to Banquo, "in the times past which held you so under fortune." So he's trying to paint Banquo as the villain. He's trying to paint Banquo as the reason to why they are living in poverty and that they are poor and they are unable to have a happy and healthy life. And he questions them. He says, "Do you find your patience so predominant in your nature that you can let this go?" So he is turning that reverse psychology on them, like Lady Macbeth did to him, saying, you know, are you so weak? Are you so patient? Are you so prepared to just lay down and let Banquo treat you like this? Again, perhaps even going so far as to question their masculinity. You know, if they were a man, they would stand up, they would do something about this situation that their families find themselves in. And so we can see elements of that Machiavellian nature coming through in that quote. He then goes on and talks about nature, and he talks about the natural order of the world. He says, in the catalogue you are men, but that's a very broad term. It's the same as saying hounds and greyhounds and mongrels and spaniels are dogs. But actually, you know, they've each got an individual characteristic that means that they can fulfill certain roles. And so he says, you know, if you find yourself in a role where you have got the ability to kill someone, then you're going to be perfect for this job. So he's manipulating them here, and he's convincing them that Banquo needs to be sort of eliminated for his treatment, and he is in a way complimenting them that they will be able to go through with this for him. He continues on, and the second murderer and the first murderer, who are going to go off and assassinate Banquo, talk about how weary they are with the situation. They're fed up of leaving things to chance and to fate, and that they want to do something about it. And Macbeth has been successful in this manipulation of them. And he confirms that, you know, I would do the murder myself, but we've got mutual friends and they really can't know that this has got anything to do with me. Banquo needs to be dispatched, but I need somebody to act on my behalf and do this. And they've agreed to it. And so Macbeth sends them off, and almost as an afterthought, he says, oh, by the way, to leave no rubs nor botches in the work, Fleance, his son, is going to be there as well. And like his father, he must embrace the fate of that dark hour. So he's saying, oh, you know, before you go, I need you to kill Fleance as well, because what we don't want to happen is for Fleance to inherit his father's title and be a tyrant as well. So if you could just get rid of him as well, that would be great. And the scene ends with the words of Macbeth saying, it is concluded, Banquo, your soul's flight, if it find heaven, must find it out tonight. And that rhyming couplet just at the end there, again with that prophetic witch-like quality to it, the rhyming of flight and night gives an ominous foreboding tone at the end of this scene. So revising this scene. Create a pictogram featuring Macbeth alone on the stage in the first part of the scene, thinking about where his state of mind is, using those quotations to show us with that paranoia to be thus is nothing, but to be safely thus. Capture that moment. Perhaps imagine it. How would you direct this? Where would you place the characters on stage? How would you stage the murderer's arrival? How would you have Macbeth talking to them? How much distance would you have between them? Write it. Imagine you're Lady Macbeth. You've seen Macbeth unravelling before you, although you've not witnessed this conversation. Do you know what's happening? Do you suspect he might take things into his own hand? Analyse it. How does this scene show that Macbeth is losing control? To what extent do we see him here as a desperate character? Can you use some of those key quotations and really drill down into the language that he's using to think about how he's being depicted at this point in the play?